Today is the anniversary of what many are now referring to as the event. That fateful day when everything was fine, but then all of a sudden, the power grid collapsed across North America. It came back up shortly for a few brief moments in different areas, major cities, but because of the demand, it collapsed immediately again, and then after that, people just gave up on it. Most of the prepper supplies have run out, and people have had to start living communally and foraging for what they can scrape up. Many thought it would be a lot more violent than this, but most have gotten over their fear and have just accepted that the future is going to be a very different place. We've stopped arguing over minutia because we know day to day, if we don't work together, it'll be our end. I can foresee events like this when the power grid goes down, and some discussions of the way things used to be and things that people used to argue over. One of them is the separation of church and state, one of those fundamental principles that's not actually in the Constitution, but is understood to be. That the church doesn't tell government what to do, and ideally, the government doesn't tell the church what to do. They stay independent of one another, but there is a very interesting paradigm that I don't think people are going to predict about grid down, power down, shit it's the fan situations. You see, church and state plays a very critical role, especially in the lives of Christians. It's their only proof that their children are legitimate and that the person that they're with is who they're supposed to be with in the eyes of God. Their marriage licenses, the blood tests that they used to do, everybody who attended the wedding. But what if? What if there was a fire and your marriage license was lost and the courts were not functioning anymore and you couldn't go get a copy? How could you prove it? Some might say, well, Florida Maquis, I don't care what other people think. I know who my wife and or husband is. Well, that's fine. That's fine, but what about others? If that were always the case, then why would you need someone else to officiate your marriage? I mean, couldn't you both just one day sit in the living room, say your vows to one another? You wouldn't even really need rings. And then in your own eyes, you would be married. Why would anyone else be required? Some priest, some pastor, somebody that filled out a little form and sent it away online and got their little certificate to put on the wall? Is that biblical? Is that what God said to do many, many, many years ago so that your kids could be legitimate? So that you could reproduce? It's an interesting thing to look up. How can I marry my friends? Meaning, how can I officiate their wedding? You see, you still have to track the marriage license, get ordained if required, sign the license, but that seems very strange. There's also this weird thing called self-uniting marriage, but even some states still require a piece of paper for it to mean anything. Now, what if grid down, power down, shit's the fan, end of the world scenario, you're 6 months down the road. People are starting to try to have some semblance of society again. And two people want to get married. What if all the preachers, pastors, clergy in the area say, yeah, no, I don't think those two should be married. There's no government to force me to do it. I don't have to officiate it. Yeah, you see these two people here, they're way too much of a difference in age. Just it wouldn't work out. Now, there's a specific reason I chose Leanne Womack and George Jones. These are, of course, two country singers. Because they sang a song that was originally recorded by Conway and Loretta many years ago that actually talks about this a little bit in the song. And this idea of marriage versus not being married and who's recognizing it and who's not. See, I always saw this picture, and for years I thought these two were a couple. They never were. In fact, they were married to other people. Conway, God rest his soul, was married to one woman. I believe her name was Temple, and then she's still alive. I'm not sure what Loretta Lynn's status is, but I know this, that if I were married to a woman and she was posing on the cover of record albums like this, I might be a little bit, I don't know, insecure. Maybe if I was younger. But what's the song I'm talking about? It's a song that was recorded by Leanne Womack and Joe Diffie, God rest his soul as well, called I'd Rather Have What We Had. And it's an interesting lyric to me, and it applies to this because it tells the story of this couple. They're both married to other people, but they sneak off to some other town. Every now and then they get a room, they get a bottle of wine, and they do what they do. So they decide they feel guilty. They're like, we can't keep doing this. We need to each talk to our partners, do the right thing, get divorced, and then we can get married and do it the right way, the honest way. So they do. And then they get together and they get married, but then they start complaining. Now it's 2 coffees and off to the office and back in the driveway sitting at home. Sneaking around with me or being tied down with me, which one would you rather have? Dying to be with me or watching TV with me? Is this what we wanted so bad? I'd rather have what we had. That's part of the song. You see, that's sometimes what makes it alluring, the idea of getting away with something. But remember something, wait a minute, what if you're in a situation which a lot of anarchists are hoping for, where you couldn't necessarily prove one way or the other whether you were or whether you're not married? Because marriage is a social contract for others to recognize. Because, like you said, like in modern times, if 2 people said, well, we just see each other as our spouses, we didn't actually go get married, we didn't go before a priest, we didn't exchange rings, we didn't get a marriage certificate, we just see ourselves, you wouldn't recognize that for 5 seconds. As marriage, you would call them fornicators. Most Christians would. But what if you don't have church or state to officiate for you? Some people are scratching their heads, What if your kids came? What if you caught a couple of teenagers, that were in your care, that were still living in your home, and they said, well, we see each other as husband and wife? You would laugh at them. You'd laugh at them. Yeah, we made promises to each other. In fact, I even have this little promise ring. You would laugh at them. You would say, no, this is wrong. You have to go legally get married by either a church official or a state official. Oh, but wait a minute. What happens when they go away? What happens then? Who are you going to waggle your pontificating little finger at then? Now, here's how context can really mess people's minds up, and how this platform is 99.995% visual, 0.04% audio, and what's left is just impressions. You see, on the left, we have the couple sitting across from each other at a kitchen table. They look concerned, and they look like they're having a very serious discussion. Perhaps the marriage isn't working out, and she has someone else. Maybe he has someone else. Who knows? And because of the situation they're in financially and socially and every other way, they still have to stay together and somehow make it work. And people are like, I would never do that. My pride would never allow me to. Well, now let's look at the situation in different visual context. What if they just decide to forgive and no longer make it a violation? Say, okay, you need a boyfriend, you need a girlfriend? Okay. In fact, I'm not even going to worry about forgiving it. What I'm going to do is I'm no longer going to make it a prerequisite of the marriage. Whatever you need to do, go do. And we're going to go forward. Florida Marquis, don't you know that Jesus prohibits that? And really? Well, in a grid down, power down situation, how are you going to prove that? And besides, I thought marriage is between a man and a woman. Can't they make any agreement they want to? No one else has any say in it. No one else has any say in it. What if you just decide to forgive it? And then after that say, you know what, I'm not going to worry about forgiving. See, we talked about this and it really made a lot of people cringe. I think right now, if we were in a situation where there was power down, grid down, more than likely the Florida Maquis would be in the stocks somewhere having tomatoes thrown at him. Because they just can't handle it. They just couldn't handle possibly the idea. There's even a bigger argument about marriage that I would really like somebody else to ask, to answer the question. The human race would have died out if, as a prerequisite for creating children, there was marriage. The human race would have died out a long time ago. It's not ours to judge what other people do and or don't do. Especially like down in the villages, for example. That's why I brought this up. Because had it been that this was the case, there would be no North America. There wouldn't have been enough people. What am I talking about? A happy marriage is the union of two good forgivers. And the book of Matthew says, Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times. Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7, which is 490 times. What if you couldn't read? Here's a question I want, honestly, my audience, those who believe they're such sanctified, sanctimonious Christians. What if you couldn't read? What if you didn't get raised in a country, socialist country, that required you to be taught to read English under penalty of law? See, that's the case in this country. That you even have the ability to open up the Bible, read things, and then condemn others based on what you've read is a result of socialism. Because prior to 1900, the year 1900 in this country, very few could, and very few would have known. What if you can't read your own marriage certificate? The person you're marrying could sign Bugs Bunny as their name. You wouldn't know. Why? You can't read. So in order to be legally married, you have to be able to read, meaning legally able to procreate, you have to be able to read. Now go back to Bible times when virtually nobody could read. Without the ability to read, you would not know that you were married, no marriage licenses. Especially when most of the time, young women, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, were married off against their will to other men at the behest of the father, at the behest of the family. The marriages were arranged. And they begat many, many, many children. See, under modern law, what would that be? It'd be statutory rape, wouldn't it? Absolutely it would. It'd be seen as a form of slavery. Read Education in the Age of Enlightenment on Wikipedia, if you think I'm kidding about this. See, this whole idea of going back to the before times, when things were so much better, how did they do things back then? How could one possibly be legally and or morally married if they couldn't even read their own marriage certificate? And if that were a prerequisite for children not being bastards, then there's a whole lot of people going to hell, I guess. Is that what you're saying? Everybody who was ever brought out of a marriage like that? Read the book of Chronicles. And every time you read the word begat, as in so-and-so begat so-and-so, so-and-so begat so-and-so, that's a lot of begatting activity with not very much mention of marriage. It's one of the most boring books in the Bible because a lot of people skip through it because it's just a laundry list of someone had someone else, someone begat someone else, someone begat someone else, with no mention of the women involved or marriages. How could you separate your morality from church and state? Because you need one or the other to confirm that you are doing what God intended you to do? Is that really what the Bible says? There were a lot of people on the planet before there were churches, and there were a lot of people on the planet before there were marriage licenses, especially in North America. Tell me again how this is some biblical command and how it could possibly be some standard for procreation. It's ridiculous. So I will leave that there. God bless. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.